This week, we will finish reading the Gospel of Mark, and the end is just as fast-paced as the rest of the Gospel has been. In these last few chapters, we'll read about Jesus' unfair trial, his crucifixion, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Other Gospel accounts give us more details about the 40 days between his resurrection and ascension. Mark tells us relatively little, leaving the emphasis on the fact that he does rise from the dead, conquering death and putting an end to the sting of death. And once Mark is concluded, we'll move on to the first letter that Peter wrote. We call it 1 Peter. It's written to a group of Christians sprinkled throughout Asia Minor, what we call Turkey now. And Peter refers to them as elect exiles, people who are not in their rightful home. And Peter writes to encourage them in the midst of some pretty fierce persecution they're suffering. Peter highlights how they are to live holy lives as Jesus did, and he reminds them to submit to the authority that God has placed over them. He reminds them of God's design for marriage between a husband and a wife. He reminds them of how they should be prepared to suffer simply for doing what is right and good, by what God has determined what is right and good. Peter's words are encouraging for us in the 21st century as it becomes harder and harder to be followers of Jesus. It can be costly, and we must remember this and help our children remember this. Peter's words in chapter 4 are pretty helpful. He says this: "Do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings." We don't have to be happy when we suffer, but it is helpful to remember, as Peter points out, that happened with Jesus, and he suffers with us when we experience those things, for suffering, for doing what is right. Be encouraged as you read 1 Peter this week.